Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today I'm excited to bring you the second part of my three-part deep dive into my complete run of Boy Comics. I'll have a link here so you can check out the first one if you haven't seen it. In the first one, I covered issues 3 to 30, and today I'll be looking at issues 31 to 59. For those who aren't familiar with Boy Comics, it's a series that ran for 117 issues from 1942 to 1956. It's one of the very few superhero titles that actually lasted all the way through the big purge of the superhero books in 49, all the changing genres, all the way into the Code era. But as we'll see, as we'll get into here, it wasn't so much about superheroes. One of the things that they did really well was they actually started shifting the genres as the series went along to make it fit in better with the changing times. The creator and head writer and editor Charles Biro was great about sort of almost predicting where the market was going to go, and so a lot of times we'll see the book is shifting into new genres a year or two before this sort of catches on. So we're gonna go through issues again. 31 to 59, and I just love this series. The main character, Crime Buster, appears in all 117 issues. He's on the cover of almost all of them. I'm such a big fan that, as I mentioned last time, I actually have been self-publishing my own continuation of the series. Here's 120, 121, and 122 is currently on Kickstarter. I just absolutely love it, and it's a series that most people don't know about now, even though it was tremendously popular at the time. So I'm just going to tell you all about that now, and why don't we jump right in, beginning with issue 31. And I mentioned this last time, so it started off sort of as a superhero book, but around issue 15 they killed off the supervillain Ironjaw, started transitioning into more of a true crime book, and which made sense because Charles Biro was the creator and writer of Crime Does Not Pay, invented the whole crime genre. And so Boy Comics basically became a crime series aimed at children, which maybe doesn't make sense. And some of these are incredibly violent, like very, very violent. But we also see here, as the series goes along, we get these covers more and more like this, which are sort of, to me, very cluttered. They get a lot of word balloons. Earlier on, they were much more sort of more central design, big figures, more iconic. They start getting busier and busier. We get some here later where it's going to take you like 2 minutes just to read the cover. And I think that's one of the reasons the series has sort of gone under the radar for so long with collectors, is because the covers aren't that great once you get up to around this era. And also the stories they're great, but they're very dense in terms of the amount of text and word balloons. Charles Biro was a writer who did everything through word balloons. There's not even any thought balloons. And so it just there's a lot of reading involved in reading one of these, and the art sort of takes a back seat. There's some really competent and great artists, mainly Norman Maurer, who worked on the series. Here we are at issue 32, and this has got a logging cover. At one point I had bought a copy of this for someone who collected lumberjack covers, but here's issue 32. Issue 33, I actually have 2 copies of it. Here is my 9.0. This is a pedigree. It's the Rockford Pedigree Collection CGC 9.0. This is really the only pedigree in my collection. But here's my regular reading copy of issue 33. Now, for me personally, and basically nobody else in the world, but for me personally, this is a sort of a minor semi-key for Boy Comics because, as I mentioned, Crime Buster is the lead feature throughout the entire run. He never got his own title, and this is the only one that has a Crime Buster logo on the cover. There's a couple earlier ones, like issue 3, his first appearance, it has a thing, a big blurb that says Crime Buster. But this is the logo that you get in the book at the top of his titles, and this is the only time his logo, or any kind of like real Crime Buster logo appears on the cover of a book, which for me is too bad. I really wish that he got his own series that said Crime Buster. And I think if he had these, actually, again, it's another thing where it would have been worth more. But you can see here all the word balloons you have to read, and it's a cool cover, the planes crashing and all this stuff. But it gets very busy, very text heavy. Here's issue 34. Some of these still have the price stickers on it. I didn't actually pay that much. I think I paid $10 for it. Spine is totally wrecked on my copy. Here's another one of Byro's Women in Red. He liked to put the damsel in distress in these red dresses all the time. Here she's about to jump out the window. And in this story, she actually does jump out the window. Crime Buster's not able to save her, if I'm remembering correctly. She was ugly. She was laughed at. What seeming miracle made her so gloriously beautiful that she was chosen Miss America? Why, with the world at her feet, did she choose suicide? What a crime! You'll also see here we get a thing that says, starring Crime Buster in 2 complete feature-length stories. One of the reasons why this is the best era of Crime Buster is that it's phasing out the backup stories. But the book is still like a full length, like 52 pages. Later on, of course, one thing they did during the Golden Age to keep the price at 10 cents is that they just reduced the page count more and more as the series went along. And so Crime Buster is squeezing out some of the backup series. By this point, I think the only backup series left at this point is Little Dynamite. So we've just seen the end of Young Robin Hood, and before that, Swoop Storm, Yankee Long Ago. Those got phased out, and the Crime Buster stories started getting longer and longer. So originally they might have been 8 or 10 pages, like 10, 11, and now we're getting up to the point where they're like 14, 15, and we're going to see that peak a little bit later on here. 35, we get another knife thrower cover. We had one of these earlier. 26, I think, has a knife thrower cover. No, it's 25 maybe. Anyway, one of them has, here we get a second one. I like this. Who is behind the curtain? Yeah. And again, Crime Buster. We also see here, they started doing these like rainbow logos. All right, so here's 36. Now, this is important to me personally because this is the first issue of Boy Comics that I got. I got my first issues off of eBay, and I happened to luck out because now that I have the whole run and I've read them all, these are the best for me between, say, issues 30 and like 45 or so, 44. Those to me are the best because they're the longest stories, and you get a lot of great writing from Charles Byro. Stan Lee was a huge fan of Charles Byro and patterned a lot of his career after Charles Byro. And in these stories, like the characterization and the empathy that he has for the characters, you get just these great character studies of both the perpetrators and the victims. And in this story, there's like all these twists and turns. And the part that I remember the most is that the woman, there's this like woman, I can't remember if she's the victim or the schemer. I think she might have been the schemer. She ends up getting tuberculosis, and she has to go to like this tuberculosis facility in like Arizona because the air is drier there, and she's like in the hospital there for like 2 years or something. And it's just really great. So here's 37. I have a really low grade copy. It's got kids' names. This kid wrote his name all over it. I think it's Orr. Jimmy Orr, not Bobby Orr. It's Jimmy Orr. And this is one of, for me, the most like crazy stories. Now, in some of these other ones, they have some crazy stories in them too, like crazy to a modern perspective. Just the idea that they're selling these to children. Like there was a story in one of the previous ones where there's this kid who has, I think he accidentally saw a crime or something, and so the villains these crooks want to kill him because he is a witness or something. Anyway, for whatever reason, there are these criminals that want to murder this like 10-year-old innocent 10-year-old kid, and they're trying throughout the story to murder this kid. Like they get him on this horse that's like a wild horse that throws him, but he survives that. And they're like shooting at him with a rifle, and they like don't quite hit him. And what they end up doing is they take these oranges and they inject the oranges with like strychnine, and then they leave the oranges out, and the kid finds them and he eats them and he dies. And then Crimebuster like avenges them, solves the crime, and catches the bad guys. But it's just like there's the whole plot is about these people trying to viciously murder a 10-year-old, and they just murder this kid. Well, this one's even crazier. This lead story, probably shouldn't actually read the cover because it kind of gives away the ending. But in this story, there's this woman who on the cover is called Joyce, and she's got this horrible father and brother who basically are using her as part of this scheme where they'll send her into town because she's cute, and she'll trap these like people, these men, and they'll come back, and she'll basically lure them back to the house, and then the brother and the father murder these dudes, and they dig a pit in their front yard, and they just throw the bodies in, and then they roll this giant boulder over it to cover the pit. And so that's like this thing that they're doing, and she's sort of innocent, but she's trapped by them. She's being abused basically. And she traps this guy at the beginning of the story and brings him back, but he's like this gambler and he's been around the block. And so he buys the woman. The father sells her as a sex slave to the guy for like $10,000. And they get married, and she's like, I don't want any part of this. And there's a whole page where the guy just beats her. Like just starts wailing on her in the face and is like, I own you now. And then at the end, she manages to get free, and she runs for help, and Crimebuster happens to be there, like, because this is in like mid-state New York. He's there on vacation with Louver, the FBI director, and so he is able to beat these guys, and they find this pit with all these corpses in it that this pit of rotting bodies. And I'm just like, this is a comic. The reason it's called Boy Comics is because it's a comic specifically aimed at boys between the ages of like 7 and 14. And this is the material that they're selling them. I was reading this as an adult going, oh, wah, whoa, ah! I can only imagine the effect on poor Jimmy Orr. I don't even want to Google this kid to see what horrible things happened to him. Here we are, Boy Comics 38. Here's some of the thing I was talking about with the covers, where there's like it takes so long to read. But here, this guy is like a scheming, like two-timing jerk. Here's another lady in red where she runs in front of a car and gets run over and killed, and he had basically thrown her over for this other woman. I really dig the period outfit the woman's wearing with the cat-eye glasses and everything. It's really cool. We're getting into the late 40s at this point. So here's number 39. And these stories are getting very long at this point. So we're getting 2 Crimebusters in each story, and in each issue, and like the backup story I think ends right around here, and we get to the point where there's no backups at all. And so the Crimebuster stories can get longer and longer. They're like 18 pages, 19 pages. Here's one where an undercover cop is gunning down a crook on the stoop, and we see Crimebuster just in the corner here. That's actually representative of a lot of these stories. There's a lot of things where we'll get like 14, 15 pages into the story, and then Crimebuster shows up. So we get this detailed look at these crimes that are going on, and all the victims, and like this really in-depth character work. And then once the crime happens and someone's been murdered, then at the end, Crimebuster shows up to solve the murder. But he very rarely is in a position to actually stop it, because he doesn't find out about the things until after they've already happened. Here's my copy of issue 40, which is missing a whole bunch of the cover. You can see it's all torn off. The interior is still intact. Um, and there's like a kid stealing from the till up here, and yeah. So here's 41. It's where we've got like a whole comic strip on the cover, and this is about a punch drunk fighter who's down on his luck, and the kids are teasing him because he's punch drunk, but it's because he has brain damage from being beaten up so hard. I love yellow covers, and as part of the appeal to boys in particular, there's a lot of stories starting around this time that start getting into sports. So that's been in the background, in the first appearance of Chuck Chandler in issue 3, Crime Buster, he is playing hockey. That's when he first appears. And so he's great at sports, but we start to get these stories because Charles Byro was also a huge fan, a sports fan. We get things where he's always constantly, Louver's taking him to the prize fight, or they're going to the World Series, or whatever it is they're doing. And we start to get stories like this. This is about boxing, and then we get a lot of boxing stories, hockey stories, basketball stories. There's some of those coming up in this batch. But this is still right in the prime of the true crime era, and this is probably the best of them. When I recommend people what to get, 42. One thing that's interesting is this has the longest Crime Buster story in it. I think it's 22 or 23 pages. So it's the equivalent of a full modern comic. But of course, as you can tell just from the covers, there's so much more going on. There's so much dialogue and there's so much plot compared to a modern comic. This will take you like an hour to read this. And what's interesting here is my understanding is this story, which I think is maybe the best of the Crime Buster stories, wasn't actually originally for Boy Comics. My understanding is that it was a story that they were going to be doing in Crime Does Not Pay, and for whatever reason, I don't know if they had a deadline thing or what, but they used it here, and then at the end, they rewrote the ending so that Crime Buster comes in and helps solves the crime. So it's basically, most of it's a frame story. So there's a story where Louver is like, there was this case back during Prohibition, let me tell you about it. And so he goes, it's like 15, 16 pages, and then when we come out of the frame story, then Crime Buster's like, let me track down and see what's going on, and then he solves the crime. But it's really great. There's again another shocking sequence in here where there's this woman who's married to this crook, and she loves him, and she's really nice and supportive and stuff, and he's just vicious monster. And she is like trying to get him out of jail and all this stuff, and he totally doesn't deserve it because he's just vile. And at one point, she's saying something to him, and he gets angry, and he punches her in the face so hard that it detaches like her like retinas or something, and she goes blind from being punched in the face so hard. And there's just this shocking panel where it's just this woman getting punched square in the face, and then this is one of the rare issues where there's actually a happy ending. What happens is the guy comes back, and like after being in prison for all this time, and their son is now an adult, and he tries to corrupt the son to become a crook with him and turn him against this blind, martyr of a mom who's such an angel. But at the end, the kid stays true and doesn't become a crook, and then in this miraculous ending, this doctor has this experimental surgery where he's able to restore her sight. It's very rare for these to have happy endings. Usually someone gets horribly murdered, and then Crime Buster gets justice on them by either bringing them in or they die trying to escape. But it's rare that anything good actually happens in these. 43. There's a boating accident with kids. We start to get more stories as we get into the late 40s here, where they start to be almost a little bit after school special, and we'll see more of this, where it's sort of this sort of post-war late 40s sort of like, I don't know if you've ever seen any of the videos that are like warning you about the dangers of like driving. We have got a cover coming up that deals with this, but it's a lot of stuff like that. It's a lot of like Boy Scouts sort of like after school special stuff that starts creeping in, but there's still a lot of crime. Here's one where there's an old man, and then there's like the kids are fighting over his will, and so one of them's like trying to kill the guy off, um, to before the guy can change his will or whatever. This is one of the rare copies of my collection that's actually in nice condition. So issue 44. And I want to, let's just step back here for a second. We get a couple things here. In the last couple issues, they started saying Illustories because he's trying to distance himself from comic books, right? Because comics are starting to get a bad rap at this point. This is like early days for stuff like people like Wortham attacking comics, but it's like 48, 49. I think we're in around there. And we also see here a force for good in the community. We start to see more and more of that. Here we got a basketball cover, and this is a jokey cover where the guy's holding a kid up to block a shot. And we start to get, again, more of these sort of sports-oriented stories. Here's an Adventure 146, where there's this guy that has a silver mine under his house, and a lot of these stories around this time start to get where there's like a kid involved. So it's like a nephew or a grandson or something, and Chuck has to help that kid on the straight and narrow. 47 is another boxing cover. So this is an interesting from a comic book cartooning standpoint, because of course we have sort of a codified language of comics now, but it was still being invented at this point in the late 40s. And here's an interesting thing where we get what's looked like a word balloon coming out of this, but it's not something he's saying. It's actually coming out of his eye, and the balloon is showing us what he's seeing, because he's been hit so many times his eyesight is going bad. And Chuck saying, maybe I was wrong about his eyesight. He must be okay if the boxing commission's doctor will let him fight. And then down at the end, bottom it says, Brophy is fast going blind. He staked all this on one last fight. Will he retain his eyes? Will he retain his eyes? So yeah, you can tell the cover has the whole plot. Crimebuster's trying to keep this guy from fighting because he thinks it's too big of a danger, and the guy manages to sort of bribe the commissioner to getting in. We have the force for good in the community at the top, but we also have a new edition here. It says conforms to the Comics Code. So that's not the Comics Code Authority that we know now that came into being in 55. This is actually late 40s, and it's something where Lev Gleason saw, again, Charles Biro as the top editor for Lev Gleason, doing the whole line. He could see where things were going, and they were the biggest target at this time because they were putting out these crime books like Crime Does Not Pay. And so this is the first attempt at a comics code where he tried to sort of head off the criticism by putting together this code of things that they weren't going to show in any other comics. And they got a couple other publishers, but you mainly see this on the Lev Gleason books, where they'd be like, yeah, it's safe to read these because they conform to the Comics Code, which we made up and we enforce. So it doesn't really have any teeth, but we do see a shift in the content. As I mentioned, we get away from some of the just horrifying stories of the children being murdered and the woman being sold into slavery. Like, those stories sort of get phased out in favor of stuff like this. Here's 48, which has a cool circus-themed cover. We got Squeaks acting as the bait. That's his sidekick monkey. 49 has an unfortunate cover where there's a bunch of natives. They're about to burn them at the stake. And this is, he's emptied your gun, Crimebuster. Okay, I'll get to this in a second. There's a bunch of stuff in here. He's emptied your gun, Crimebuster. Our magic is gone. He says they have nothing to fear from us now. Goodbye, Crimebuster. It was nice knowing you. And Crimebuster saying, don't look now, Professor, but Squeaks is up in that tree with a box of blank cartridges. When they light this wood, he's going to drop them in the fire. And the chief is going, Unga, Guzza, Balapo, Maki Oha. Translated into, their power is gone. I told you they were phonies. Give them the works. I love that the dialect is translated like into Chicago gangster. What's weird is that it says Crime Buster 2 feature-length stories, but neither of them are this one. But then there's a thing at the bottom. Crime Buster goes on the most dangerous adventure of his life. So this may have actually had 3 stories. I'm not sure. There were some Crime Buster stories around this time where some issues that have no backups at all, and so it's all Crime Buster. So these are far and away the best of the issues. The other thing I wanted to mention about this cover is that I was actually translating a little bit. If you look here, they don't call him Crime Buster, they call him CB. This is going to become more important later on, because once the comics code comes into place, you can't actually have the word crime. So they can't actually call him Crime Buster on the comic. So they call him CB for a long time, and you're just supposed to know that it's Crime Buster. Even inside, like his friends and people would just call him CB. Hey, CB. And then eventually they decided right at the end, we'll get to this next video, but they just started calling him Chuck, because that's his name, Chuck Chandler. Issue 50, we celebrate the big issue 50 anniversary with this super busy hockey cover, where you can see the dotted line. Shows it's like a family circus cover, basically. And this one here, it says, from now on, in every issue, 3 feature-length CB Illustories. This one is The Most Hated Hockey Coach, CB's Miracle, and The Big Bet. So we're in this period now where we're moving away from the true crime and we're moving into... there's still a lot of adventures. We're going to see a couple right away after this, but we get a lot of this sort of thing, like hockey stories, stories that have inspirational messages for today's youth. Here's issue 51, which has kids parachuted out of a plane and is about to get eaten by alligators, and Crime Buster's flying by, and he's like, yeah, we'll get to you in a second. Don't worry. The 3 stories in this issue are CB and the Dead One. It's a little hard to tell, actually. The ink got all messed up here. How inferior can a complex get? You'll see a man rise from the depths of despair with the help of some homespun CB psychology and plenty of action. What was the cure for this man's hopeless despair? Then there's the man who made words kill. And it says the words a villain utters can be as deadly as the lead in a pistol. And then it's CB and the jealous partner. More than clashing personalities supply a rocketing series of events that make the story a hair-stander-upper. 52, it's got a cool train cover. There's people out there that collect the trains. This copy here that I have is actually a Canadian edition. No, sorry, I got that backwards. 51. Canadian. You can tell because it says 36 pages, full-size mag, whereas actually, as you see here, it's supposed to be 52 pages, full-size mag. So 51 is my Canadian version. The interior is in black and white. So here's the train cover. Again, we got 3 Crime Buster stories, CB and the Fantastic Riddle of Filbert's Family Tree. I'm buying it. There's my 10 cents. CB battles the maddest criminal of them all, the ape. All right. And CB meets the meanest man in town. 53. We're still in this sort of great era where there's 3 stories. 54. There's some kids having a fight in the principal's office. What's interesting here is that Crimebuster's not even on this cover. It's just the story, the kids fighting in the principal's office. But don't worry, Crimebuster's in this one. But again, this is the sort of thing we're getting during this period. A lot of lessons for schoolboys. Speaking of lessons for schoolboys, it's 55, where it's literally Crimebuster with a class of schoolboys, and they've all been having a massive fight out in the playground. Or actually, these three jerkweeds in the background that are looking so smug, they're bullies, and they've beaten up everybody else in the thing. In this issue, CB and the bullies, and the man who liked to be wrong. 56. We've seen a couple of these when they're doing these underwater boat things. A lot of times we'll get this sort of almost like side view cutaway diagram. In this case, there's a buried treasure under the water. Last time we saw, I think it was issue, what was it, 22, where there were some divers on the bottom and the guy up top was cutting their air supply. This time around, they're down here diving for treasure, and some pirates have smashed their boat because they're going to steal the treasure. So there's still action, but a little less violence. All right, so important issue 57, because now we start getting backup stories again. And this is one of the rare issues where Crimebuster does not appear on the cover, even though he's the lead, because this is introducing the new feature, Dilly Duncan of Dorset High. So here's Dilly, or somewhere in here is Dilly. Anyway, it's basically sort of their answer to Archie, except it's not funny or interesting. It's actually really just bad. But starting in this issue, Dilly Duncan becomes the new backup story. So we still have 2 Crimebuster stories, but instead of 3, we're just getting 2, and now Dilly Duncan comes into the book. I'm not a fan of Dilly Duncan. So series is still really good at this point. We're still getting 2 long Crimebuster stories, but sort of the best era has definitely ended because we're not getting 3. And then here's issue 58, which has this giant Mile High Comic sticker covering part of the cover. And then here we got Chuck's on a motorcycle and someone's strung a rope across the road to cause an accident. Because this guy over here is trying to pressure him into signing a contract, and he's like, I'm waiting for Crimebuster to come to give me legal advice, which seems like a bad idea because he's just like a 16-year-old kid with a trained monkey. I don't know why you want his advice. And then finally, last one for today, it's number 59. The guy's waiting behind the door with a lead pipe to clock Crimebuster. That ain't gonna work. And again, we see, interesting here, they're not calling him CB on this cover. They actually call him Crimebuster. But there we are, number 59. So I'm stopping with 59 because issue 60, the series takes a turn. Issue 60 is one of my favorite issues. It also is a big issue because it reintroduces, back from the dead, Chuck's archenemy Ironjaw, and then the series takes a turn from that point for a while. So it's a big sort of turning point issue, but it's also the lead story where Ironjaw comes back. It's really important and great. Has a lot of meta commentary about the comics industry at the time. So I'm going to kick off the next one with that, with issue 60. For now, I hope you've enjoyed this look at issues 31 to 59 from one of my favorite comics, Boy Comics, starring Crimebuster. And next time I do one of my Complete Run Madness videos, I'll wrap this up with part 3, and I still have my part 3 of my Wonder Woman collection coming up too to look forward to, so we'll be doing those soon. So thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.